Elsie Jensen here. Today we're going to be making a kind of a Korean barbecue steak with snow peas and rice, and we're going to be baking our 2 loaves of sourdough we prepped. So we have our roasted garlic and rosemary and our traditional. They were cold proofing in the oven, or in the oven, in the fridge. Now we're going to take off our plastic and I'm going to flip them out, score them, and put them in our Dutch ovens that have been preheating at 500 degrees for the last hour. So this is our traditional loaf. And I'm going to just flip it out of my Banneton basket and slowly peel away the cloth. And that's flour on top. And then I'm going to give it a nice big score down the middle. This is going to add that nice pop. And then we're going to just do some little decorative scores down the side. But the big score in the middle is going to give it that nice big pop. And now I'm going to take the lid off of my hot Dutch oven. And since this is my loaf one, I'm going to put it in my oval Dutch oven. And then I'm going to carefully transfer. Our Dutch ovens are very hot. They've been preheated up to 500 degrees, so always be careful. And remember, the lids are hot too. So use that. And now we're going to score our next one, which is our rosemary and fresh garlic loaf. Here you can see the rosemary and the garlic in it. And it has a wonderful garlicky smell. And we're gonna flip this out onto our parchment paper as well. And for this one, I am going to do kind of a cross hatch score. So this will kind of give it a nice square look to it, which is very pretty on the round loaves. And I'm going to take my lid off. Remember, they're very hot, so always be careful when you're preheated Dutch ovens. I'm going to carefully transfer this to our pot. And now my oven is at 500 degrees. That's what I took my hot pots out. I'm going to put these back in and we're going to cook them at 20 minutes at 500 degrees. Then we will take the lid off and cook them for another 20 minutes at 450. So, put this one in. Got that one. And then I'm going to shut it so none of my heat escapes. And we're going to get this bad boy in. And now I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes so I don't forget to take off the lid. So that kind of keeps the moisture in and gives it a nice cook through. And then when you take it off, that's going to give it the nice golden crust. Okay, we are going to start on our rice for it. So I'm going to use 2 cups of basmati rice. And I'm going to give it a quick rinse in the sink. Let me get my measuring cup real quick.
And what are you making tonight? And what just went in the oven?
Our 2 loaves of sourdough that we prepped went in the oven. One is an olive, or not an olive, a rosemary and garlic loaf. And the other one is just our standard sourdough loaf that we make, our basic recipe. I think we have that recipe card up on our page. We're going to be doing 2 cups of this. I'm going to be putting it in my little schooner over there so we can give it a nice rinse. With rice, you should always rinse it before you use it. Just because there's actually like arsenic in rice. Who knew? Okay. So just 2 cups. And then we're going to give it a quick rinse over here before we put it in there. So always just give it a little rinse to get off all that white powdery. This will also give you a nice, like where your rice kernels don't stick together as much. shake. Perfect. And I'm gonna add it to our pot, and I'm gonna add 3 cups of water and then just a splash of olive oil. And we will bring that to a boil, and then we'll turn it down and put the lid on and cook. So just basic rice. There we go. I'm gonna turn my heat on high. So you gotta bring it to a boil first.
You got a comment that you know the most random helpful tips.
Well, you know what? You learn through the time what's good, you know what I mean? And it makes your cooking turn out better and easier. I'm gonna give it a nice stir. There we go. And then we're gonna bring it to a boil, and then when it's heated up, we'll put the lid on and cook. Now, we're going to prep our steak. We had 2 New York strips left over from there's my cleaver, from Valentine's Day. So we are going to cut this up thinly because this is gonna be our protein in tonight's meal, which is gonna be like a Korean teriyaki, like stir fry essentially. Okay, I am going to take off, since we're not gonna be grilling up this, I'm gonna take off this big fatty cut of the strip, because that, since we're slicing this thin, that will just turn out to be really chewy and not good to eat. So we're just gonna trim it away. This is nice about strips, is it's really easy to trim the fat away from a strip versus like a ribeye where the fat is very marbled into it. Okay, and then I am just going to thinly slice my meat. I'm using a cleaver, which is really good for slicing a meat. If you've never used one before, but you do a lot of like cutting up of your meat, I would invest in one because it really is so much easier than using like a basic chef knife. It just cuts seamlessly. There we go. Get these all chopped up. And the trick with this is you want to cut it very thin because you just want to saute this up really quickly. You don't want to have to cook it any longer than like 2 minutes or so to keep it nice and tender and not getting too tough. Okay, we'll chop up this guy as well. There we go. Nice and thin. It doesn't have to be, you know, this is about the good thickness. You don't want it too thin, like shaved meat. You know, that might be good for like what is those, Philly cheesesteak or something like this. But this, you just want it to be, I would say that's like 1/4 of an inch maybe. Fairly thin, but it doesn't have to be paper thin. Kind of think about when you have like Chinese food or teriyaki, like hibachi type things. They cut it fairly thin and just get this fatty vein off so that it cooks up and stays tender at the same time, and you get a lot of the flavor on it. Okay, we're almost done. Beautiful. Few more strips out of this. I will say these 2 New York strips, they give you actually quite a lot of thin cut beef up there. I mean, I would think together this was probably about 2 pounds of steak. So it's a lot, especially when you have are making like an Asian dish. A lot can go a long way, like those 2 steaks. Okay, I'm gonna transfer these guys into my bowl. And we are done with this, and I'm going to give my hands a quick wash. Okay. Now, I'm only going to season it with just a little bit right now because I want to be able to sear it up and get a nice good crisp on it. So I don't want to put too much seasoning, liquid seasoning in it right now. I'm going to add more later, but I'm just going to use this Japanese barbecue sauce. This is absolutely delicious. And I'm gonna put maybe about a tablespoon, not much of it right now, we'll add more later, but just to get a little flavor to soak. And then I'm gonna add in some garlic. Let me get a spoon. And we're gonna add in about a teaspoon of garlic. I hear my rice starting to bubble over here, so I'm gonna give it a good stir. And we'll turn. I find if you're making rice, always do it in a slightly bigger pot than you have. So you have, like this one, I have a good chunk of room so that if it bubbles and it steams, it really traps it in there and gives it a nice. So
What are you making?
We are making a Korean barbecue steak with snow peas, mushrooms, and some rice. I'm gonna grab my lid. And we're going to turn it all the way down to low. And we're gonna seal in that moisture. And it will just steam and make our rice nice and fluffy while we prep. Okay, so I put in about a tablespoon of our Japanese barbecue sauce and a teaspoon of garlic. And I'm just gonna stir it up. And we're gonna let it kind of do a simple marinade. We'll add more flavors in a little bit, but that's just a little base. There we go. You don't want to put too much liquid in it because you want to be able to sear it up nicely in some oil. And if it's too full of like juicy marinade, it will just sweat in your pan instead of getting a good sear on it. There we go. Trap that in. I think actually I've got the wrong lid. Let me check. Sometimes I have two pots that have very similar lids. No. Turn it down even lower. Turn it down even lower. There we go. Okay. I can't find the other one. I'll give this a quick stir. We got that. And I'm going to start prepping our vegetables. And we're going to let that, we got a little water bubbling over, which is fine. Once it cools down completely, it will just go to the steaming process. If you have a rice steamer, that makes the best rice. I normally buy my rice in the freezer section. You can get really good sticky rice in the freezer section. It's way better than any rice that you boil in a pot. That's what I normally do, but they were sold out of it all this week, so we're just using our basic. I am going to thinly slice up our onion, and then I'm just gonna cut it in half because I don't want to have super long stringy pieces, but I do want the good flavor of some caramelized onion in here. And there we go. Give it a chop. And then I'm also going to turn on I have a little pot in the back here and I have it halfway filled with water. I'm going to turn that on to start boiling because towards the end we are going to blanch our snow peas before we add them into our stir fry. And if you don't know what blanching is, it means you're just simply cooking it in hot water for like 30 seconds. Let me get a little paper towel here. We got a little starchy bubble over. There we go. Perfect. And that's why I say use a big pot. Minimize that. I'm going to turn my skillet on to a high to begin with so we can warm up the oil. And I'm going to add in about like high to begin with so we can warm up the oil. And I'm going to add in about, like, I would say 2 tablespoons of oil at the bottom of it, and we're gonna let it warm up, and then we'll saute up our onions and some garlic. And then we're gonna chop up some baby Bella mushrooms. I'm gonna give these guys a quick rinse. And then we'll start slicing them. Easy. Okay. And I'm just going to do kind of a thin slice on these. I want them to be able to get nice and tender with a nice crisp on them as well when we saute them. So just there. You could also buy pre-sliced mushrooms if you wanted. I find if you buy the pre-sliced ones, you've got to use them within a couple of days of buying them, like within like 3 days, or they get slimy. So I typically buy the whole and use them like later on in the week for cooking instead of trying to get them used up right away. But that's kind of the most of anything that you buy pre-cut is you got to use it quicker than if you buy it in the whole version of it. There we go. Let me see, I see my oil starting to kind of sizzle here, so I'm going to pop in my onions. And break them up so that they can start to caramelize. There we go. And just, I want to make sure I cover them all with some oil up. That way none of it sticks or burns to the bottom of my pan. But I do use these are hex-clad. I really recommend the hex-clad pans because they are truly non-stick. And I have yet to scratch them. I've had them for 2 years and I have not scratched them, which I cannot say with the other brands of non-stick.
You got a question? What are you cooking tonight?
We are cooking, we're gonna have a kind of a Korean barbecue steak with snow peas and mushrooms with white rice. And then we popped in 2 loaves of sourdough in our oven. One is our traditional loaf that we have, our recipe cards posted. And then our other one is a garlic rosemary loaf, which smells absolutely delicious. I'm very excited for that one. So I'm just gonna get these chopped up. I do not take off the stems of my mushrooms. I know some people do, but if you look at the mushroom and the stem, it's the same thing. So you just get more mushroom by keeping on the stems, unless you're doing the really giant portobello mushrooms. If you've ever seen them, most of the time they've already got the stems off and you just have the caps. But those stems aren't as good. They're more of a chewy stem, and you want to beard them from their their insides. There we go. We'll give this escaping a little stir, and then I'm going to add in some garlic. And we're going to use about 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. If you were using fresh garlic, it would be about 2 to 3 cloves. There, and I'm going to give it a nice stir so it can sizzle up. There, and I'm going to give it a nice stir so it can sizzle up. Smells yummy. We're going to let those brown and caramelize. Let's see how, put that over there. We want our water to get nice and hot because we're going to blanch our snow peas. Which, again, if you've never blanched something before, you are literally dropping them in boiling water for like less than a minute, and that just tenderizes them. And then we'll drain them and we'll throw them into our stir fry. So they'll be tender, but then they'll crisp up with our stir fry as well. There we go. We're getting a nice, starting to get a brownish color on our onions, and they're starting to become more translucent. The longer they cook, they kind of go from white to translucent to then you start to get the caramelization, which happens when the natural sugars are starting to caramelize or turn brown in the onion. And that's when you're gonna get your really rich and yummy flavor from them. And you wanna use yellow onions or Valdalia onions for sauteing. Red onions are better eaten raw. They don't have a very strong flavor. And white onions are better in salsas. They're fresh because they have a really, like a peak taste that kind of doesn't caramelize up as nice and aren't as sweet. There we go. Got a nice browning on here. Perfect. Beautiful. Okay. Now I'm going to toss in some mushrooms, and I'm going to let them saute in here with the mushrooms and the onions. The onions will continue to cook up with the mushrooms. We're going to give it a nice stir. And we're going to let these mushrooms brown up nicely. I'm not going to add any salt or anything until they get a nice crust on them first. Because when you add salt to mushrooms, it causes them to like deflate and let out their natural liquid. And I want them to get a nice crust on them. I'm gonna flip my cutting board over because we're also gonna be having pineapple with tonight's dinner. So I'm gonna wash my knife because once I cut pineapple after I cut onions, and my pineapple I didn't wash it well enough. So I'm gonna give it a quick wash and then we're gonna cut up our pineapple. There we go. So let me grab our 2 big pineapples. Some people are very they think it's very daunting to cut up a pineapple. They're actually a lot easier than you think. Give this a stir. And I'm going to show you how we cut it up because this pineapple costs $2.99. If I were to buy this amount cut up, it'd be like $25. So I always buy mine whole and cut it up. So first you're going to take off the top, then you're going to take off the bottom, and then you flip it up, and then I'm going to cut it all the way down through the middle. And then we're going to cut it all the way down. We're going to quarter it now. So we're having it into fourths. And then we're going to cut it down one more time. And then this. You go like this. Takes out the core. And then you just hold it on the other side. And you're just going to cut down. And now you've got your whole. And you just chop it. And we throw it in there. And this is how you can get rid of the core. And it's really not that hard. Pineapple is actually fairly tender, so it's not a hard fruit to cut through at all. Give it a cut right there. And take our big core out in. And this, I find, you get a lot more fruit. Some grocery stores have those like automatic pineapple like peeler and core. But you lose so much of your pineapple with that. And I find most pineapple that you buy from the store needs to sit about 2 to 3 days before you can cut it up because it's still underripe. Our bread, we'll take a pause because I hear our bread is ready for the lid to come off. I'm going to give this a quick stir. And I'm going to turn it down just a smidge. Okay. Let me get my oven mitts. And then I'm going to have 2 lids that I'm taking off here. So this is 20 minutes at 500. Now we're going to take off the lids. Always use a good oven mitt for this. So here is our first one. Let me see if I can pull that apart. You see how much it burst open? Now we're going to cook it for another 20 minutes at 450 degrees. And you see how much it's popped open there, how much it's risen? Beautiful. And then we just turn our temperature down to You're gonna turn it down to 450 degrees. So we're dropping it from 500 to 450 degrees, and we're gonna cook it for another 20 minutes. So I'm gonna set my timer because otherwise I will forget. And now we can finish up dinner. Okay, perfect. Before we finish up planting our pineapple, my water over here is boiling. So we're going to blanch our snow peas, which is simply, we're gonna pour them into the water and we're gonna let them cook for about a minute max. And then we'll dump them out. And this is gonna give them a really vibrant green color as well as make them a bit more tender. So we've got 2 bags of snow peas going in. And I'm just gonna dunk them all under the water. And we're just gonna let them cook for about 1 minute and then we will strain them. My mushrooms and my onions, we're starting to get a nice caramelization on it. See how beautiful that looks? Okay, we're gonna decore this guy right here. Perfect. And we'll cut down. And then, didn't cut close enough, there we go. Perfect. And now we'll just give it a quick chop through. And lovely. So I always say, practice cutting your pineapple a couple of times at home. It's so easy. It really doesn't take too much time. And you can enjoy fresh pineapple for a fraction of the cost. And at Costco, fresh pineapple is really cheap. It's $2.99. I think even Target, it's super cheap. Grocery stores, it can vary, but they're typically like around $3 to $4 versus what you pay for them to cut it up. I think one of those like small containers to get cut up is around like 8 to 10 bucks. And this makes about 2 of those small containers just from one. And we love our pineapple. We love fresh fruit here. I always serve fresh fruit with our dinner at night. That way if my kids don't like something, well, they'll always have fresh fruit or they'll always have something that they love. Okay, we'll cut up our next one in just a second, but we're getting perfect to about right here. Now we've had these in there. You can see how they've gotten a much more vibrant green. So we're gonna strain them and then they'll be ready to go into our thing in just a second.
I got a question. How do you tell if a pineapple is ripe?
So here's kind of how I told. I've had it and I'm sitting on the counter. You see how it's golden at the bottom? Once you've gotten a golden color, but not brown, in between it, that's when it's ripe. If it's all green, it's not ripe. If it's brown, it's overripe. So look in between your pineapple cracks. And that's how you're gonna tell if yours is ripe or not. So I always say most of the time they're all green at the grocery store. So I always let them sit on my counter and ripen. A good shake. Beautiful. Okay. Turn off my burner back there. And I'm gonna give this one more stir. Beautiful. And then we're gonna saute these in here as well. Always a couple that jump out. And see how they have a much brighter green color? That means they've gotten tendered, so they won't be like chewy or stringy. They'll be nice and tender. And that's what the blanching does. One more in here. There we go. And I'll give these a little saute up. Beautiful. And then we're going to top it off with a little bit of this barbecue. It's her Japanese barbecue sauce. It's like a sweetened teriyaki sauce, but it's not overly sweet. So I can just open it. There we go. It is so good. I use this in my Spam fried rice. It packs a bunch of punch with it. It's nice. It's not spicy. They do make like a spicy one and a yuzu one, which has a little bit of a citrus flavor to it. I like the original. It's the best. Okay. So here are our stir-fried up vegetables. Now, I'm going to get my other skillet out, and we're going to cook up our meat that has been, so this one. And if you have a wok at home, you could use a wok. Woks really only work if you have a gas stove. If you have an electric stove like this, a wok is not going to work well because you need the fire to come up over the sides of the wok because it's a curved bowl. So don't waste your money on getting one unless you have a gas stove. I'm going to put in a good about 2 tablespoons of oil, and I'm going to heat my skillet up. Got it heating it nice and high. We want to get this oil really hot because we're going to drop in this meat and we're going to sear it off, and then we'll throw it in with our things, and we'll add a little bit more sauce. And then our rice will be done and dinner will be done. So I'm going to cut off my tops again. Apparently, if you put this in, like if you have a fresh one and you put it in water and some soil, it will regrow, like the pineapple bush will regrow. I've never done it, but I've heard it's one of those things that can regrow, like carrots can regrow, radishes, celery can regrow. But who's the time? So I'm going to cut down the middle, and then we'll take out our core in the middle. Easy. If you have a toddler or like a young baby at home, I'll give them the cores to chew on. It feels great on their teeth. And they love it. And they get a little bit of that fruity flavor, but it's a great natural teaser for the little ones. There we go. And we get the middle out of this one. Okay, I can see a little bubbling on my oil, which means it is ready for us to drop in some of this meat. You don't want to just dump in all of your meat at one time, because what happens is the natural liquids in it will ooze out, and then you won't get a good sear on your meat. So we're just going to spoon in a little bit at a time and spread them out, because we want to get some good sears on it, but we don't want to crowd our saute pan because we don't want it to sweat too much liquid out. Let it cook for just about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll toss it. The one thing with steak is you don't want to overcook it. You want it to be nice and tender, just like when you eat a regular steak. You don't want to chew when you're done with it. Okay. And here you can see, if you look down at the meat, you can see it starting to brown around the edges. So look, we've got a nice browning on them. We're just going to flip them over and do a quick sear on them. Beautiful. We'll let them sear up for another 30 or so seconds while we peel off. And you just go right along, and you see how much of it we get to actually save versus the machines that do it, and it just kind of presses down in a circle. And now we're just going to give them a quick little toss. And I'm gonna transfer this last bunch because these will continue cooking, but I want them to be a nice medium rare. I don't want them to get overcooked. So we're gonna toss them over here.
You got a question? What are you making?
We are making a Japanese barbecue sauce steak, kind of stir fry with snow peas, mushrooms, onions. We've got some white rice cooking up, and we have some sourdough in our oven cooking. We have a traditional loaf, a plain one, and then we have a rosemary and garlic loaf. I'm gonna put the rest of this in here so we can saute up. And then I'm gonna go wash my hands real quick. Oh, I'm sorry, Ruby. That gets you. Beautiful. I'll let it sear up. I'm gonna cut my next piece of this. I also buy my melons, like cantaloupe, honeydew. I also buy them.
You have a question? How much rosemary did you put in the sourdough bread?
I put in, it was about a tablespoon of rosemary in it. So what I did was I took 1 whole garlic and I chopped it up and I sauteed that in olive oil, about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And then I put in about 1 tablespoon of rosemary into that heated oil to really let out its fragrant flavors and to bring that up. And then that's what, after I mixed my sourdough and I waited 30 minutes, that's when I folded in my garlic and
I believe
my rosemary.
We have video of that.
Yes.
Was it yesterday?
No, 2 days ago, I think.
2 days ago.
Or it could have been yesterday. I don't know. May have been yesterday. It was yesterday because I made the loaves last night. So yeah, yesterday. I think we made it during lunchtime.
Fresh or dry rosemary?
I like to use dry because I find fresh is a little chewy in your loaf of bread versus dry isn't as chewy. Okay. We got these sauteing up beautifully. Now I'm going to give it a quick stir. Beautiful. And turn it off. And set it off. We're going to add these over to our stir-fried vegetables. I cook them separately because I wanted our meat to have a nice sear on it and not sweat in the vegetables. So I like to cook them separate and in batches versus dumping all of the meat in. Now I'm going to give it a nice drizzle of my teriyaki barbecue sauce. It's the Japanese barbecue sauce. This is the best. That's going to give it its really good flavor. We did marinate it with a little bit of that, but you don't want to have it in a super juicy marinade because you want it to sear off nicely. Now we're going to just toss it.
You have a question? Do you ever make chicken and dumplings?
Somebody sent me that request, so I have bought the ingredients and I'll be making chicken and dumplings sometime this week. So we will be doing that. Our rice looks like it is done. So I'm going to pop this off. We've got our nice rice in here. And I'm going to put a little bit of butter and salt in it because my kids love their rice with a little bit of butter and salt. So get a little bit more. I like to use soft butter, room temperature. I always have butter sitting out so that I can use it because it melts up much nicer. So I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of butter. And then we're just going to give a little bit of salt. And then we're going to give it a nice stir so it can flavor up our rice. Again, a lot of times I like to buy the sticky rice that they sell in the freezer section. I think P.F. Chang's makes one, and the other one is I think like Real Food or something like that. but their sticky rice is really, really good, and you just have to pop it in the microwave. And turns out much better than anything that I can make on my stove. Now, if you have a rice maker at home, that makes some good rice. I just don't make enough rice to justify buying a rice maker. There we go. So I've mixed it up nicely. We've got it nice and fluffy. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna check on and see how much time we have left. Oh good, our bread will be ready in just a second. So I'm gonna plate up our plate how we serve it, and then we'll be able to get our loaves out and you guys can check on them. So the way I will be serving up is we'll put a nice big pat in the middle, and then we'll spoon it over. If you want it to be like extra bougie, you could fry an egg and put an egg on the top, and then that would kind of get nice, and it works really well with the teriyaki flavor, and it would get into your rice as well. So here is our dinner tonight. We have our New York strip that we cut up thin, and then we marinated in some of this Japanese barbecue sauce. Then we sauteed up some mushrooms and onions and garlic. We blanched our snow peas. We tossed them in our stir fry. Then we sauteed up our steak, and we added a little bit more of this. We made our rice. I'm gonna cut this last pineapple up, and then we'll be ready to get our loaves out of the oven. They'll have, you'll see our traditional. If you have watched our lunchtime videos with us where we make a lot of our sourdough grilled cheese sandwiches, that's the bread we use. It's our traditional sourdough loaf that we use on that one. Today we made like a pizza melt with them. On the sourdough, they were absolutely delicious. And we just have one more. There we go. Cut this off.
You had a question? What are you doing with the pineapple?
We always just have fresh fruit as our side. It's just a great way to get more fruit into our kids, especially if they're off to school lunches. I pack my kids' lunches, but occasionally but most of the time it's just canned fruit at school. So we like to have fresh fruit and eat as much of it whenever we can. And so I always serve it for dinner, especially if I have meals that my kids might not like part of it. They always like the fruit, or there's always something. So I always think that in mind. Okay, let's get our loaves out of the oven and get my 2 trivets that we're gonna need for our 2 loaves. Okay. And my pot holders. Oh, perfect. We have, so this first one coming out is my rosemary and garlic. We'll bring it over here, set it down, and then we'll get the other ones, and then I'll pull them out so that you guys can see the full loaf when I pull it out. So you can see it already have a lovely crust and golden things. You could choose to cook yours longer, but the longer you cook it, the more chewy and crispy your crust is going to be. And I prefer mine to be a little bit more tender, especially because we use it for our grilled cheeses, so I don't want it to get too chewy, especially since we're toasting it up. So I do the 20 and 20. Okay, I'm gonna pop these out. Let me get a cutting board. When you take your sourdough out of the oven, if you're new to it, do not cut it right away. It needs to sit for about at least 10 minutes so that it traps the moisture in and kind of continues cooking. You don't want it to escape because that can give you more of a gummier thing. So here is our rosemary and garlic loaf. And I'll pop the bottom. You guys can see the nice golden crust on the bottom. And then this is our traditional loaf that we'll be using. And again, I always like to, I cook them to about this one. I don't go much in because I put it in the toaster and toast it up again. So if you overcook it the first time, it's only really good for your first time of eating it. But guys, we are done here. So thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We try to do live cooking shows every single day, and we post our videos to the link on our page. Again, thank you for joining us. And feel free to send us messages if you have cooking questions or comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.